Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we'll explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who have found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. All right, we're back with another episode as part of season 2, January 2024. Here we go, here we roll. And I am equally as excited. I say I'm excited every week because I'm always excited. It's like, oh, you're being redundant. No, it's like I am always excited. And I'm excited particularly this week because we're talking to my new friend, Sally. And I say new friend because we've upgraded from just colleagues and people who have gotten to know each other in professional circles. And it's been great because Sally and I have been talking for a little while about having her on the podcast. And so I'm really, really excited to add to what I know about her, the story that she's going to share with us today. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Sally. Sally, welcome. And tell us a little bit about yourself, but start with, how would you like to be known?
Well, thank you, Paul. I love how you introduced the beginning of this episode as friends. Yes, we are not just colleagues, we are friends. How would I like to be known? I would maybe start off this episode with thinking about maybe 3 words that describe me, and my top 3 words. I always go to lifelong learner. Number 1 is I love to learn. I love to teach. So for sure, number 1 is lifelong learner. Number 2 is driven. I seem to just have this kind of, unending drive to get things done. I love accomplishments. I have multiple to-do lists all the time going at once. So love to cross things off and get things done. So very driven. And number 3 is introspective. So you'll kind of probably notice in our interview today, I'm an introvert and I am introspective. I do like to have a lot of deep thinking. And sometimes I was listening to several of your episodes to kind of prepare for this. I know you said not to prepare, but sometimes because I'm an introvert and I like that introspective thinking, sometimes the words come a little bit slower because I really like to think things through. So I'm very much a thinker, introspective, introverted. And yeah, those would be it's kind of a 4th word is to describe me as introvert. But my 3 top words would be lifelong learner, driven, and introspective.
Well, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the additional kind of explanation around introversion and introspective and thinking. Like, it sounds like you are very thoughtful and you enjoy the process of contemplation amongst other things. It seems like that's an important part of you.
Yeah, I love the learning process. I think maybe the 1 and 3 adjectives kind of go hand in hand. Is in my day job, I'm a Clifton Strengths coach and consultant, and my number 1 strength is learner. And what that brings is, in Clifton Strengths language, is really this like curiosity and inquisitive nature. It's always looking for continuous improvement, and that's what I really enjoy, is my own learning, but also facilitating the learning for others. And so I just love that learning process and the deep inquiry that can come with some deep thoughts.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. And I bet that's going to reveal itself too in our conversation today. Sally, you said you are a strengths coach. I'm just curious, and whether it's part of your story today or not, I would love to know. You said your top strength is learner. What are your other 4 strengths?
Well, just to clarify, there are 34 strengths in the grand scheme of Clifton Strengths. So it's not just top 5, but many people just focus on top five, because they're considered your signature, your dominant strengths, actually your top 10, if we want to expand the language a little bit. But just to focus on my top five, number one, learner; number two, achiever, which is kind of consistent with the way that I described my driven nature. Achiever loves to achieve, loves to accomplish things, loves to cross things off the lists. Number three strength is responsibility. And this will probably actually come out in my story a little bit too. Number three, responsibility, really takes ownership for their commitments, and they do what they say they're going to do. They follow through. They're known as dependable, loyal. Number four is input. So input loves deep thinking, similar to my introspective, has a craving to know more, but a real depth of knowledge, versus learner, which loves the learning process, not necessarily focused on the outcomes. And then number five is futuristic. So number five is also in the strategic thinking domain, always inspires people by what could be and their visions of the future, which also kind of ties back to my story, which we'll get to. So those are my top five strengths: learner, achiever, responsibility, input, futuristic.
Nice. Thank you for sharing. Let's get into this then, because we are talking about your story. Before we get into the five questions, because I ask the same five questions of every guest, I always like to start with intention. So as you think ahead to the conversation that we're going to have, the story you're going to be sharing, what intention would you have for yourself for the next 40 minutes or so?
I love this question because it's not about goals. It's about just your mindset, right? So my intention is to have an open mindset, to be curious, but also to be brave. That word, it conjures up some other kind of thinking for me. Is that here's one of my favorite phrases: is bravery is not the lack of fear. It's the ability to move forward and overcome in spite of it. So I think there's a little bit of bravery that it takes to come on your podcast, Paul, to be honest. You take your guests to places where they don't even know they're going to go. So I'm going to be brave today.
I so appreciate that reflection. And my intention is to support you in being brave. And since you said it, to take you places that you didn't know you were going to go. And the whole intention that I have in doing these things is first of all, to reflect to anybody who's listening that, everything you need is within you. I mean, each of these stories, and I suspect your story will be no surprise, is that it really does reveal to us how resourceful we can be, and that the process is just as important as the destination, right? But also importantly is that, we're not here to give people advice or tell people how they're supposed to do things. It's just like, let's hear what someone else's experience was and model, demonstrate, right? And so someone out there, or many someones out there, sooner or much, much later down the road, is going to hear something you said. They're going to connect with that. It's going to resonate with them, and it's possibly going to inspire, motivate them, or at the very least, help them feel a little bit less alone in their own experience. So that's my intention, is to create that space and to make sure that you're able to tell the story in the way that you want to tell the story.
Okay, let's do it.
So let's do it. Let's jump in with the first question. You've already said, I haven't heard your story. I'm curious to hear what you're going to be sharing today. So the first question, Sally, is where have you found yourself sitting on a comma in your life?
Where have I found myself sitting on a comma in my life? Just to repeat back the question. And I love your format, that it is a standard set of questions, but just to kind of rephrase the question, is really what you're asking is, where have I found myself stuck?
Possibly.
Right?
I leave it open for interpretation. Some people would hear that question. It's a good comment that you bring up, right? What does that mean? Some people hear, where have I been sitting on a comma? And that means, I've been stuck. I've had other guests describe it as, well, there was just a pause point in life. I was in between things. I was in transition, or I was choosing to take a break. So it's really wide open. So feel free to answer that question in whatever way you interpret that question.
Okay. I interpret it as like a feeling of maybe being stuck and kind of sitting on the comma, not knowing what's on the other side of the comma, perhaps. The story I want to share is my sobriety story. I know you've had guests on in the past, and you share with your listeners that you are also sober. And this is a part of my story that I just feel like it's time to share. I was sitting on a comma, I guess, to use your language. I've been thinking about it like for a long time. I sat on this comma as a drinker. So I sat on this comma as to use some language from kind of our sober coaching space is as a gray area drinker. And I just want to kind of explain that for purposes of your listeners that may not be familiar with that term. I know that you are. Gray area drinking is a term to really define the gray area, pun intended, between the extremes of people's relationship with alcohol, right? Whether the extreme being the take it or leave it. And I recently heard this described as like maybe 10 drinks a year, like very intermittent, take it or leave it, rare drinker, to the extreme, what many people think of as the rock bottom, like extreme alcohol use, and possibly to the extreme of needing medical detox and that far end of the extremes. So if we kind of bookmark those ends, everywhere in between is very gray, right? So and there's a spectrum in medical terms. It's not called alcoholic. It's called alcohol use disorder. Just so we're kind of speaking the same language here. My drinking was in the gray area. To share a little bit about my story, I sat on this comma for probably years in the gray area and not understanding that there's a term for that, first of all. And not being willing to, I don't know, shine a light on it and really look at it, and just kind of muddling through. And I didn't know I was stuck. That's the other thing is there was no real, I don't know, no real awareness that it was I also don't like to use the word problem, but there may have been a problem brewing, if I could put it that way. And I sat on the comma because I was unwilling for probably several years to look at it and to explore it and to even think about it. I was in denial, probably is the best way to say it, that my drinking was impacting my life in many ways. And even though it was gray area, I don't want to get defensive or sound defensive, but I am a little bit, judgy toward myself in this way. That I don't have a DUI or a lost job or a failed marriage or any like really bad life-changing things that prompted me to explore. I just kind of got, to use a phrase that I know many people use, is like got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I got really sick and tired of, here's what I got sick of, Paul, was like beating myself up about my drinking and regretting like, I had one too many last night, or, I wasn't going to drink the whole bottle, but somehow the end of the bottle is here, right? Like, I'm just going to stop at 2. Well, no, I'll have a third drink. Well, then what's the point of, putting a bottle of wine back in the fridge with this much wine in it, right? So, it just became for me, my drinking days it became very regular, very normal to have, 3-4 glasses of wine throughout the evening. And while some may hear that and think, oh my gosh, that's a lot, others might look at it or hear it and think, oh, that's nothing. I mean, that's why this is a gray area, right? And people build up a tolerance and whatever. So that's what I mean by this kind of spectrum or this gray area. I know how much I was drinking and it was too much. I mean, that's really the bottom line.
First of all, I just want to acknowledge you for what you just shared. That is brave already in sharing that, and reflect back a couple of things that I'd love to unpack some. On the one hand, you said, I wasn't even aware that I was stuck. And yet on the other hand, as you described the experience, then you did start to use terms like, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I was getting tired of beating myself up and the regret. Where and when did the awareness that you were stuck or wanted something different start to manifest for you?
I started working with a coach. Of all things, right?
Yeah.
I started working with a coach in like early 2021. And it's funny. I remember telling my mom this story, and she's like, "What do you mean you're working with a coach? You are a coach." And I'm like, "But everyone needs a coach. Even coaches need coaches, right?" So I started working with a life coach, and this is actually really kind of part of the story here is I started working with a life coach. Now my coaching practice and background has been very much as I described. I'm a Gallup certified Clifton Strengths coach. All of my coaching network, really a lot of what my training is strengths based. Mm-hmm. And I started working with this coach who was referred to me by another coach who was doing a special during COVID, where she was offering a package of 2 sessions. And I signed up for her 2 free sessions package of like extra support during COVID. And this is the brilliance of working with a coach is I didn't know I was sitting on this comma, and through gentle inquiry, she just unpeeled the onion and eventually got to, oh, maybe your drinking is having an impact on your business, your relationship, your family, your XYZ, right? And so it was really through, and she's one of the acknowledgments I'd like to add at the end is Laura Geduldig was the life coach that I started working with. And it was really through that process that I uncovered, maybe this is an issue. Maybe it's something I should look at. Maybe it's something I could be curious about. Mm-hmm. Turn on your learner talents, right? Is like that curiosity of the open-minded kind of self-reflective. And it was really through working with her that eventually I got to, maybe there is something about this that I should take a deeper look into. So that was kind of the catalyst, was working with a coach. And even though as a coach, it can provide so much value. Like I said, everyone needs a coach. It just was that much of a game changer for me to start working with her and just kind of going through that process.
Well, and it sounds like, so you were experiencing a number of different things, and that in working with a coach, you were able to identify connections and correlations amongst these things. So when you said earlier, I didn't realize I was sitting on a comma, like you were experiencing different things and you were experiencing frustrations, but working with this coach helped you kind of connect some of these things together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. When you were experiencing this, well, let's kind of segue into question 2. We go back and forth between question 1 and 2 and all the questions through the conversation. But, you said you were sitting on this comma with your relationship with alcohol and drinking and your frustration and beating yourself up. What did this create for you? Go a little bit more into, and so what was happening for you in the midst of all of this?
Well, I mean, I think it was probably the typical cognitive dissonance that people have with their relationship with alcohol, meaning like, I want to drink, but I don't want to drink. But I don't want to drink, but a glass of wine would really be nice at the end of the day. So it was this like, when you want something, but you don't want something at the same time, right? That's what cognitive dissonance is. And there was just, what did it create for me? This sitting on the comma was like confusion, really, frustration, confusion, kind of not really sure what to do or what to do next.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So I don't know if that answers the question. It created a lot of confusion in my mind, but it created this confusion that once I started kind of peeling back that onion and started thinking about it, I did turn on my learner instinctively, right? And so this is kind of one of the things I wanted to share is my talents showed up instinctively, which is what our talents do, right? That they are our natural ways of being. Once I got curious I signed up for a program and did a 21-day challenge. I signed up for another I did Annie Grace's 30-day alcohol experiment, which is very much a learning program. I didn't know I was signing up. The first thing I signed up for, I didn't know it was a learning program. I just was like sick and tired, like, oh, okay, I'll do this. Like, I don't know. I'll take a break from alcohol and magically in 21 days, it's going to change my relationship with it. It doesn't really work that way, right? But I instinctively got curious of like, what would it feel like? I don't know. What would it be like to take a break for 21 days? And once that curiosity was turned on, I knew there was more to learn. And so my learner and my achiever was like, oh, I can get to 21 days, or I could do another 30 days. So my achiever talents kind of really kicked in, learner and achiever kind of working both at the same time. And the more I learned, Paul, you can't unlearn what you've learned. It's one of my favorite sayings. You can't unlearn it, right? And so I just kind of kept going. I also leaned on my input, number 4, my intellection is my number 6. I just wanted like this. I have this instinctual, deep craving to learn more. And when I use my third adjective was introspective. That's what this whole first 60, 90 days of me, giving this break from alcohol a try was like, I need to learn. I need to just take alcohol out of the equation for a little while, open up the learning curiosity and shine a light on it and see what happens.
It's so powerful. And what I'm hearing, because what I hear in so many people's stories, and also those of us who share our stories about, changing our relationship to alcohol, quitting drinking or whatever, people have different motivations or different, I'll call them triggers, in the sense that things that prompted us to move in a different direction.
Mm-hmm. Different motivators?
Yeah, motivators. Thank you. And I'm hearing you describe one of yours was just all the things you could learn. Before we go into the next question, I guess what I'm curious about is what else was motivating you? What else was prompting you to make this change, even all the way back as early as talking to and taking on those 2 coaching sessions?
Well, addiction is tricky, right? Just that the whole topic of addiction is tricky. But part of my thinking, and maybe why I was in denial for a little while, is I do have a family history of alcoholism in my family. And I guess I kind of deep down always knew that I might have a similar path if I didn't do something about it. And it was like I described earlier, kind of the comma I was sitting on was a little bit of denial for a while. And that was another kind of way back in the back of my head was, who knows what might happen down the road, right? I also, maybe this is part 2 to answer your question. Part 2 answer to your question is, I'm not quite 50, just in terms of age. And when I was 46, I think I went to a doctor and he's like, well, you're in your late 40s. And I was like, ooh, late 40s. So by the time I was 47, I was like, ooh, I'm in my late 40s. What does that mean? Oh, I've got a milestone birthday coming up. So part of my thinking was this milestone birthday that is actually in 2025. So I still have a little ways to go before that big 50. But I was also thinking, do I want to continue? Maybe this is my futuristic talents at play here, is forecasting to the future. Do I want to keep the drinking habit up and into my 50s? Because I know what it looks like in my 40s. And if I keep going into my 50s, 67, like how far do you want to go? Right. So maybe that was part of it in my thinking, is kind of milestone birthday in a couple of years. Do I want something different?
Yeah. Well, I hear a couple of things, if I can reflect back. First thing that I think really resonated with me and comes up because I hear this a lot is just the fact that you said, deep down I had a knowing, or deep down I knew.
Mm.
So I want to kind of really put a bookmark on that, because I hear that in a lot of people's stories. And I think it's important for us to remember, especially on this type of a journey. It's like, again, they're all good sources of input, other people's feedback, things that people are pointing out to you, things you're reading, but always know that you always knew. Like there was always a knowing, whether
Yeah.
you acknowledge it or not. Like for all of us, there's always a deep knowing, right? And sometimes we know it, we hear it. Sometimes we then start to bring it forward. So I want to acknowledge that.
Sure.
And then also that you were projecting, right? You were visualizing, and what does this look like in the next decade, and the next decade, and the next decade? And I assume that meant two things. One, how could this progress? And two, even if it doesn't progress, what does that look like, right? I
Sure.
don't hear
Yeah.
you excited. I hear more questions about that than any
Mm-hmm.
hope of possibility, or any possibility, I should say.
Well, part of that, Paul, I think is when I started this journey, I did not have an intention to quit drinking. That was not my intention whatsoever. I was like, oh, 21 day reset challenge. I'll just, do 21 days and everything will be fine. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. Right. I think what the cognitive dissonance piece was, because my futuristic talents could see into it could project the negative into the future. It did not see sobriety as my future at that time. I had no intention to quit drinking. I had no intention of ditching the booze. That wasn't my goal. Also my achiever, that was not my goal. But as the inquiry and as the learning and as I got further and further down the road, I toyed with moderation, and we all, I'm sure, have those stories of, playing, setting rules. And that was just a complete, I really want to curse here, but I'll just say,
Go ahead.
it was a mind fuck. Okay. It was just so many rules and thinking about and planning, and it just completely fucks with your brain about trying to moderate. And that's if that works for people, that's fine, but it's a lot of work. It is so much work. So once I kind of got down the road, I just was like, well, what would happen if I just said I'm not going to drink for a while, right? And there's no need to it's not a lifetime commitment. It's just, I'm not going to drink right now. And just take it off take it out of the equation. And that's when things really opened up, was this freedom of, oh, I'm not thinking about it anymore. I'm not planning. I'm not counting. I'm not setting rules. It just is out of my thought process. And that's when things really started to open up.
I really appreciate that. I too had a similar experience where, I've tried moderation in the past. Anytime I left an open door, then I always ended up going to the open door. Right. And when I finally made the decision to quit, it just became it's for good, because if it's a yes, no equation, then it's always an easy conversation I could have in my head. Right. But if it's a yes, maybe, then it's like, well, is this the weekend that I allow myself to? Or maybe I could just have one. And it's like you said, it's so much fucking work. But when I was like, the answer is just no. Yeah, that's a big damn deal to say this is over. But it is like ending a relationship. It's like, well, we might still hook up, or we might still get together. Just prolong something if you can even control that, right? But when I was able to say, this is just no more, everything just became so much easier, right? Doesn't make it magically more wonderful, but it is definitely that much easier. Sure. And that's what I'm hearing you describe as well. Let's go into the third question, because I'm really excited to hear your answer to this, because the question is, what did you learn about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma and learning being something that you've talked so passionately about? What have you learned?
My immediate response to that is, I can do hard things. I mean, it's kind of a theme throughout my life is doing hard things, and we can come back to that a little bit, but like quitting drinking was hard. It was really hard. This whole process that I described, you have the 21 days and then 30 days and then more. I mean, it is like a breakup with a bad boyfriend. That you have to kind of go through this whole transitions process, right? And kind of a new identity as a non-drinker. So there was a lot of emotional stuff to go through. But I have done hard things in the past, and this was one thing that was one of the hardest. I will just say it. It was really hard. And I know people who quit drinking and they're like, oh yeah, it wasn't that hard. And I'm like, okay, for me, it was really hard. It was really hard. And one of your guests talked about a tattoo they have. So I'll share my tattoo. And this was, like I mentioned, it's kind of a theme throughout my life. This was a tattoo that I got before drinking was ever part of this whole conversation. The tattoo I have says, "Nevertheless, she persisted." And it's a little catchphrase. We don't need to go into the history of where it came from, but I'm a woman in a male-dominated field. I'm civil engineering by background, so I was always kind of the outsider. Even back in college, I was one of very few females in college. I joined the Peace Corps. I didn't speak Spanish very well, but here I was, this gringa in Honduras, and like really struggling as an outsider. And that whole kind of concept of persistence kind of shows up in different spots in my life. And this is another one that, like I said, I got the tattoo in 2017, and I didn't quit drinking until 21. 22 is my official date, but it's just kind of been a theme, and that's what I've learned. Who knows what I'll do in the future that's hard also, but I can do hard things, and this was really hard. I don't know what your experience is, but I know plenty of people who quit, and it's not easy.
Yeah, no, I love that, and it's something that comes up in a lot of conversations when people start to have the doubts or the questions, or as some of our UK friends will call it, they might have a wobble or whatever. It's like one of the things we do with each other to support each other is remind ourselves, is like, you now have evidence of what you can do, right? Having done this is already your proof. You don't have to, look very far or look very hard to find your own evidence. I am curious for you, Sally. So first of all, acknowledging that and acknowledging the absolute passion with which you said that. I can do hard things. This proof of your capability, which is so powerful. And we don't have to get into all the hard things, because if it was hard, then there's probably a lot in it. What was the hardest part?
What was the hardest part? The hardest part probably, it's not just about building new habits and keep the ritual, change the ingredients. It's not that. The hardest part probably was the understanding the reasons of why I was drinking and doing something about that. And many people people drink for a variety of reasons. That's just a general statement, right? I realized and learned through this whole kind of process is I was using alcohol as a tool, and as a tool to self-medicate, and as a tool to relieve my anxiety. I put that in air quotes because alcohol actually causes anxiety due to all the brain chemistry changes that it messes with your brain, right? So I thought I was using alcohol to de-stress at the end of the day. I call myself a stress drinker. I was a stress drinker. I was a new-ish kind of entrepreneur when alcohol became part of, deeper into my equation. As a consultant, I travel very regularly, crossing time zones. And so it was more than just a habit of like a daily drinking habit. I was using it to de-stress or to like have a stress relief. So the hardest part was understanding, well, one, like coming to terms with that. Okay, well, using alcohol to self-medicate is not healthy, right? So just calling it what it was. But two, I really had to learn new and different ways to manage my stress that didn't involve alcohol. So, and that's a learning process, right? That takes time.
So it wasn't, what I'm hearing you say is what you learned is not just that I can do hard things. You also had an opportunity to learn more about yourself, because in setting aside this tool, recognizing that it was a tool, and then digging deeper into the why do I use this tool? Why do I drink? You really started to unpack your relationship with stress and anxiety, is what I think I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. And then finding new ways to, I don't remember where I learned this, but as a sobriety coach, what we can help people do is help people understand, why do drinkers drink, and what tool is it providing, and have you given it a job, right? Does alcohol have a job in your life? And that was a really powerful image for me to hear, is like, for me, the job I gave it was to manage my stress.
Sure.
Right. So for other people who are drinking, who may be listening to this or struggling with their relationship with alcohol, like, that's the question to ask. First of all, is like, what job have you given it? And then you have to take the job back, because you have, for me, I gave it this job of de-stressing me, and I had to learn to take that job back from it and find other tools to de-stress, or to manage my travel, and to manage, my business and all of that.
I really appreciate this, because there's so many folks, and even a lot of folks, who are totally fine with their relationship with alcohol. And this is not, we're not here preaching and telling everybody they need to quit drinking, right? This is a conversation about if you yourself have started to have that little inner voice, or started to question or whatever, and you have chosen to explore a different path, then here's things to think about, right? I really appreciate this visual that you share with us about the alcohol being the tour, because we all know that it's never just about the drinking, right? The drinking is usually to address something else. And for me, it was that's how I turned my head off. That's how I separate work day and work Paul from relaxing Paul. You hear people say all the time, oh, I don't have a problem with alcohol. It relaxes me. And that's not untrue, right? If it's doing that for you, then of course you're getting that benefit out of it, until you're not, right? But this is what I really appreciate about what you just shared, is like, even if, let's just say, I love to drink because it relaxes me, or it makes me more social, or helps me loosen up at gatherings or whatever. Great that you've identified that. Now let's just set aside the whole alcohol conversation for a hot minute, and let's talk about, okay, that's one tool. What else would relax you, right? Or what do you feel like you need to relax? Or what's the hardest part about trying to relax, right? And then 1,001 questions that can come in there. So this is what happens for folks who are on the journey to change their relationship with alcohol. This is what you're describing with us, is at some point you talk about the drinking, then you have to acknowledge what else this drinking has a relationship with. And then you have to start to visualize and then unpack. And if I take the drinking out of the equation, then what am I left with? And that's what makes it hard, as you've described. And it's what makes it scary for many people, because once I set aside the booze, then I have to look at all that stuff without a filter. And yet that thing that is the scariest thing ends up becoming the most rewarding and the most satisfying, and one of the hardest things you can do, which is proof that you can do hard things. I just love every part of your answer to this question. So,
thank you.
Sally, what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this whole comma?
What has changed? Well, lots has changed. For one, I'm a non-drinker. I got off the comma, right? So just to think about it that way, right? What has changed? Once I got off the comma and kind of went through this whole like ditching the booze process, so as a coach and consultant, most of my work up until, let's say 2022, when 22 is the year that I went through this kind of whole transformation, if you will. My coaching practice has, previous to that, has been focused in executive coaching and leadership coaching. I do a lot of team development and team workshops in my day job. And what opened up for me was, so I already knew this about me. I love to learn. I love to teach. I love to facilitate. I love to be, even though I'm an introvert, I love to be in the classroom facilitating the learning process, whether it's a workshop or a team building or a strengths type of team event. I absolutely love that process and being part of that process and watching the learning. But what it opened up for me was this whole new layer of teaching and coaching that I didn't even know existed. I had never heard of sober coaching or sobriety coaching or alcohol-free coaching or whatever label you want to put on it. I mean, I'm not big into labels, but whatever we call ourselves as sobriety coaches. Some coaches use different terminology, but I had never heard of that, much less would I ever have looked at hiring one. Right at that time, I was working with a life coach, and she very clearly in the beginning said, well, I'm not a sobriety coach. That's not my specialty. And frankly, Paul, I'd never even heard of that as a thing out there. As a coach, I've been a coach for more than a decade. And everyone, while coaches have their niches, I had never heard of that as a niche. So in 22, I started doing some programs and really learning. My learner number one always comes back, and got exposed to this whole idea that you don't have to label yourself as an alcoholic. You don't have to go to an AA meeting. You can, through inquiry and learning, change your relationship with alcohol. There's no need to submit to a higher power. And if that's your thing, fantastic. That's it. It works for many people, but that was not the route that I chose. And just learning this opened up this idea of, oh, I can help people with this. This is a problem that I have unique insight into. And this is where I want to change the world, Paul. I want to help people do what I've done. Is I feel like I have transformed my own life and gotten to the other side of alcohol. And that's what drives me, is to help people, gray area drinkers, feel that same thing, because that's what this has created for me, is this passion and this like vivid image of helping people, facilitating that for other people and helping people get off their karma when it comes to being stuck in a drinking cycle. And I had never heard of it in the first place, like never knew what a sobriety coach was. And now we've both been through the certification to do it and to help people change their lives by ditching the booze.
Yeah. Well, and you're yet another example. This comes up so often in all these conversations, and I just love this. It's such a human thing, right? Is the very thing that you struggled with, it's the comma you were sitting on, ends up being the thing you carry with you into the future, and you use that comma to help other people or to help frame your new direction or where you go next. And it's so interesting how often this shows up, that it's like the process or the struggle that we go through ends up becoming the product or the tool that we use in the next steps or the next part of the journey. So, and that had to have really fed the learner in you, as you said. Nice.
Yeah. I mean, the learner while it loves to learn, it loves to teach also. Right. So some of my new coaching endeavor is I kind of do both. I do some coaching, but I also put together a 31-day take a break learning. It's a learning program because I love to teach. So I put together just a little course that people can take. And this is not an advertisement for that, but it's just how my passion has come out, is I love to coach and facilitate that learning process, but I also love to teach.
Well, and as a learner, you have unique experience of being a learner and being with learners, right? So it's obviously, it all ties together there. And absolutely, you can give a plug for yourself, and do that here in just a second when we talk about how people can find you. Last question, though, in the 5 is, what does getting off the comma look like for you?
What does getting off the comma look like for me? It means, or what it looks like, and it kind of goes back to the word that I used at the beginning of this recording, is it means being brave.
Mm.
It means kind of taking a leap of faith into the unknown, because like I said, I didn't dream of a future of like being sober, being happily sober, like, and being joyful about like being energetic and energized and like want to scream it from the rooftop of how
Mm-hmm.
great going alcohol free is. Like that was not what I was like ever would have dreamt of. But it took some bravery just to kind of start to peel that onion back and think like what could happen, what could the possibilities be. Um, the other thing that comes to mind is not just, you know, because I do think it takes some bravery to examine your relationship with alcohol. It takes some deep thinking, but I also think what's important to bring up is that it's okay to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
I think I felt stuck for a long time because I just didn't know what to do and thought I should be strong enough to figure this out on my own. And it's what I learned was this people's relationship with alcohol is tricky, and it's tricky for a lot of people. There are a lot of people out there that feel the same way that I felt, and I didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
The first group that I joined, I mentioned this 21-day program. It was women that when I started to get to know them just through this like very short program, I was like, they feel the same way that I do. They feel the same
Mm-hmm.
way. I didn't know there were other people that felt this way. Like I just didn't know. And I didn't know it was okay to ask for help.
Yeah. Yeah. People can't see, but I can see. And this is very moving for you. This is a very deep point for you. What's coming up for you as you're saying it's okay to ask for help?
Um, I think maybe I have always been one high achiever, right? I always come back to strengths language, but like I've always been one to like put a lot of pressure on myself for being the best at whatever, right? Being one of the only women in engineering school, um, for doing hard things, which is what I said earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can
Mm-hmm.
do hard things. That's the perfect example. I felt like all through my life, I can do hard things. I don't need someone's help. I can do this, right? I can join the Peace
Mm-hmm.
Corps. I could do this, I could do that, and like do these really amazing hard things. And this was something that I needed help with. And I didn't like I joined a program. It wasn't quote that big of a deal by like just clicking, okay, join. But what opened up was it was an outreach of like, maybe I need to join a support group or a program or do something because
Mm-hmm.
this is not solving itself on its own. And I just didn't know where to turn. And nowadays, you don't have to go to an AA meeting and go to whatever that looks like and declare you're an alcoholic. You don't have to do that. That's not that kind of help. There are other kinds of help that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said before, I don't want to knock AA because I think it's helped millions of people, but
So many
and
people.
so
Yeah.
many people have that's not where I'm going with this, but just knowing that there are so many other alternatives out there, and whether it's books and podcasts or hiring a coach or so many other ways to get help with this issue, um, that I totally got off track here, Paul. But
That's okay. Well, let me reflect back a couple of things though, because what I'm also sensing is, and you tell me where I'm misreflecting here, but I'm sensing that I can do things alone if I want to, but I don't have to. So there was this sense of connection between you and the other women in your group, these other people who showed you how not alone you are, because other people do experience things like me. And I'm also wondering, Sally, if some of those tears were also tears of gratitude.
yeah, and I think today is something like World Thank You Day or something like that. By the way, as we're recording this, um, Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so grateful for the women in my group. We actually still keep in touch. There's 6 of us that are left that have hopped on. We went from like the Sober Curious 21-day program and hopped on the sober train. So that's literally the name that we gave ourselves in our little app
Nice.
group. And yeah, they're women around the country that I have now met all of them. I've met all of them in person now through the past 2 years for different reasons. But they're an amazing group of women. And yeah, if even just extend, I don't know, asking for help piece is finding that connection is really
Hmm.
important, especially because you don't have to do it alone. I mean, I guess that's the message, right? Paul is
Yeah.
like, you don't have to do it
and
alone and you
and
don't
and
need
people who
to.
can relate to your
Mm,
experience. Yeah, people who can relate to your experience and understand what you're going through, even on the deepest levels, right? Like I'm tapping my temples here, knowing that there's people who don't just understand it because they lived in that neighborhood or they bought that thing or they worked in that job. It's like they understand it because they live in
mhm.
your head, you know. Yeah. What would you acknowledge yourself for from this conversation, Sally?
Well, I was brave. That was what I want. That was my intention. I wasn't sure where this might go. And I expected I might get a little emotional. I didn't think it would, I don't know, at one point it came up, but it obviously came up at the very end, but, acknowledge, yeah, just the bravery and open-mindedness and for doing this. I knew, Paul, that your sessions are I should say your podcasts are more like coaching sessions. So you never know where a coaching session might go, which is
Mm,
part of the beauty
mm.
of coaching, right? That's why the field is just so amazing is you never know what will open up for people, right?
Yeah. Well, and it proves like the importance of getting it out from inside of us, right? Whether that's writing it down in a journal or having a conversation with a friend or talking to a coach or sharing your story on a podcast, right?
Right.
Is so much can happen when things come out or when we allow ourselves to let it out. And I just want to acknowledge you for that because not only did you do that today, but your story also shows us how doing it in your life can make big changes. And for anybody who's sitting on a comma, we don't always necessarily know where we want to go. So if you're not clear on what you're going towards, it's okay to know what you're going away from.
Mm,
And the further away you get, then you can start to look toward, right? So,
yeah.
there's that messaging in there too. Sally, share with us, how can people find you or where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, people can find me. So my new website for this coaching endeavor, doing sobriety coaching and programs, is called Magee Coaching Solutions.
Mhm.
So they can find me on my website, and you can share the website there. They can also find me on LinkedIn. So my full legal name is Sally Magee Bankus, and professionally I just go by Sally Magee. But they can find me on LinkedIn and on Instagram. I am the Sober Strengths Coach. So Sober Strengths
Nice.
Coach on Instagram. There's various ways you could find me.
Wonderful. We'll have all that in the show notes as well, so people can just click on the links. That is awesome. And then thank you for that. Also, because I think it's an important part of your story, and it's an important part of this platform. An important part of this platform is to give a voice to others, right? And so what I always do with each guest is, thinking about your circles in your life, who else would you want to acknowledge? And that can be individuals, creators, organizations, causes that maybe as somebody you would like to give a little extra boost to or give a voice to or just a shout out to.
Yeah. I would like to give a shout out to 3 people/organizations. One is the life coach that I worked with, or that I mentioned earlier. Her name is Laura Gedoldig. She's a master certified coach, and her coaching practice is called Vitality Coaching. She's amazing, 20 plus years as a coach. She's a mentor coach also, so she coaches coaches, which is really cool. So Laura is her name. Number 2 is Annie Grace. So I know you know Annie. She is the author of This Naked Mind, which is the key book, but also her programs are really amazing to read. If you are interested in exploring your relationship with alcohol, highly recommend, in addition to my own 31-day program,
Hmm.
I highly recommend her alcohol experiment is a 30-day, another learning program, right? To lean on. I did that very early in my journey. And she does a whole host of other programs also. But I think she's a real game changer for the sober curious and the sober movement of people exploring their relationship with alcohol, not necessarily, quitting, but just kind of doing that exploratory kind of those steps. And then the third one is an organization that's near and dear to my heart. They're called the Guide Dogs of the Desert. So I live in Palm Springs. I'm out in the desert in Southern California. And this organization, so I have a chocolate lab. He is not a guide dog, and I don't have any blind people in my family. But what my own chocolate lab has done for me, I didn't get a dog until I was in my young 40s. He's now 5. So he has been just a life changer in terms of my mental health, and just the love that I have for this creature is so different than any other pet I've ever had. But anyway, the Guide Dogs of the Desert is labs. It's also some other types of dogs. I think they do poodles, but it's mostly Labrador retrievers. Anyway, they just their quick plug is they provide mobility, companionship, and independence for the blind with custom trained guide dogs. And I do a 5K every year that is called the Santa Paws. And it's a fundraiser for the Guide Dogs of the Desert, and everyone shows up in there. You get Santa outfits. Nice. And it's this crazy thing that we do in Palm Springs.
Nice.
But it's dog friendly, so it's full of dogs, and they're just an organization that they're changing lives, Paul, by training the dogs to really create, like it says, the companionship, the independence, and the mobility for people that need that kind of support. So
wonderful. And thank you for these acknowledgments. They'll be in the show notes with links as well. So Sally, I will, as always, look forward to our continued and ongoing conversations and getting together when you're in town or vice versa. But meanwhile, thank you so much for all of your bravery and transparency and openness today, and for being on the show and sharing your experience. It's kind of interesting that it's January. It's timely, right? That there's a couple of episodes, here in January that are talking about alcohol. So I think that was not by design. That was synchronicity, I think. And so maybe it was
meant to happen.
People who are ready to and need to hear these messages, right? So have a wonderful weekend ahead.
And I just wanted to say thank you for hosting and just for the opportunity to be on here. This has been a pleasure, Paul.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. What an honor it is to witness these stories from these amazing human beings, and today's guest was no exception. I invite you to think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. I can't tell you how magical it can be to set aside your expectations and just let your thoughts flow out of your head and onto paper. You don't have to have an agenda. You don't have to do anything with it, but you can be amazed at what comes out of your thoughts and onto paper and what that can do for you. I know freestyle journaling has been a powerful practice in my life for a very long time. You just never know what you might discover about yourself. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. Follow me on social media at Off the Comma, and also look for upcoming workshops and events at offthecomma.com, or better yet, go to offthecomma.com and sign up for my mailing list and let me bring the news directly to you. I am passionate about keeping this podcast ad-free so that we create a safe container for people to be able to tell their stories uninterrupted by commercials and promotions. I currently cover all the production costs, and I'm happy to continue doing so. And I'm also open to and appreciative of any donations that anyone would like to contribute. This is nothing more than to be able to support the podcast and cover some of the monthly editing and producing and equipment costs that are associated with this podcast. So look for the donations link in the podcast descriptions wherever you find this podcast. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast, and more importantly, spread the good word. If you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. As always, keep noticing.